Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm so honored to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, child and teen development specialist, author, and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two great kids who give me the opportunity to love, learn, and grow every single day, whether I want to or not. Believe me, I get it. It's not always easy, but we're in this together, and we have some really great people helping us along the way. Author and activist Glennon Doyle Melton said that life is hard, not because you are doing it wrong, but because life is hard. How we cope with the life we have been given can be the ticket to isolation, frustration, and self-destruction, or the key to our happiness. We all get ourselves into a cycle of habits that either serve us or destroy us. And during this podcast, today, we are going to shine high beams on the negative habits that are bringing us and our children down, and the tools and the takeaways that can help us embrace happiness again. Life coach, author, and self-described hellraiser, Andrea Owen is passionate about empowering women to value themselves and fiercely love who they are. She helps high-achieving women let go of perfectionism, control, and isolation, urging them to choose courage and confidence instead. Her new book is called How to Stop Feeling Like Beep, bleeping that word out just in case there's little ears listening. 14 habits that are holding you back from happiness. You can learn more about Andrea and her new book in the show notes of this podcast or on yourkickasslife.com. So much to learn about habits and happiness today. We are so grateful you are here. So welcome, Andrea, to How to Talk to Kids About Anything.
Dr. Robyn, I'm so glad to be here talking to you.
It's so much fun to have you because, we haven't seen each other in so long. And so it's like two gals having coffee at the same time doing a podcast.
Doing a podcast and helping parents, yes.
Yeah, sort of like a side of helping people, but also together hanging out, having good conversation. So before we get into the meat of the matter, for those who haven't had the opportunity to meet you and read your book, could you please just tell us what gets you up in the morning and what has led you to your work on the detrimental habits that are holding people back from happiness?
That's a great question. Okay, so what gets me up, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that was, well, actually my alarm. I was never really that much of a 6 a.m. morning person until I had children, but now I am. And I'm totally forgetting your second question because I was sidetracked.
How did you get into this work on all these habits that are holding people back?
Habits, yes. So it was, I wrote my first book, and as you can relate to, Robyn, afterwards I was like, that is the last time I'm doing that because it was so much work. It's sort of like having a hard pregnancy and labor and hard newborn, and someone's like, when are you gonna have another baby? Never. So, but what ended up happening is I was paying attention to my clients and the women in my classes, the women in my community, and to my own life as well. And I came up with 5 habits. I believe back then it was, this was like around 2014, 2015. I asked my community, which one of these do you struggle with the most? And it was inner critic, isolating and hiding out, control, perfectionism, or people pleasing. And there was no real winner. Most of the women said, I struggle with all of those. Yes. And so that got me thinking some more. And I took a couple of years to really pay attention and just get curious about all of those. And then it sort of branched out from there. And I came up with 14 of them, which was the birth of my latest book.
So, you talk about in the intro of your book that you really lived this. You had to, this is not just you advising others. Yeah. You have had to embrace these habits because of some hard stuff that was handed to you along the way. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it was interesting time in my life. And in around 2006, what happened is I was married before to someone I had been with for a long time, and we were discussing trying to start a family and trying to conceive our first child. And my then husband decided to have an affair and got our neighbor pregnant.
Oh
And
gosh.
it was awful. It was so awful, and it just like sent this ripple through his entire family, and it was dramatic and traumatic at the same time. And so I did what I probably shouldn't have done is I immediately went out and started dating, and I met someone whom I thought was great. And it turns out, 9 or 10 months into that relationship, it turns out he had lied about having cancer, and he was addicted to opioids and had used that story to try to cover it up, and had conned me out of money. And I was actually pregnant at the end of that relationship with this child. And so I was faced with a choice, or actually more to the story was that he went to he agreed to go to an inpatient rehab facility and try to get clean and sober. And I was willing to forgive him because I didn't have I didn't know what it was like to be with an addict. I didn't know what I was walking into. And I do know that there are many, many people out there, myself included, who recover and end up, for lack of a better term, living happily ever after, if any of us really do that. And that's what I was hoping for. And unfortunately, he met someone in rehab whom he fell in love with, and we broke up. So it was a moment where I found myself literally on the floor, Robyn, like in the fetal position, hysterically crying to my sister. And I was saying to myself, how did I get here? Because this is not how I imagined my life to be. I wanted to figure it out. And my whole life I had blamed everybody else. If that person would just get themselves together, if this would just, if this would work out for me. And I finally, throughout the course of the next few weeks after that happened, decided, I kind of looked in the mirror and was like, well, maybe it's me. Not that these people hadn't done awful things to me, but I had to take some of the responsibility. I had not trusted my intuition in both of those relationships. And I really had just not ever taken it upon myself to change my life and make myself happy. So that was the beginning of my own personal development journey.
That is fascinating. And I really love that you're coming from a place of authenticity. You're talking about your own struggles so that you're able to come up with these habits, not just because you're applying them to what your clients have said, but what you needed to get up off the floor. So I would love to know from you, in a nutshell, what do you think is the key to happiness then? Is it about the accountability? Is it about going with the flow? What is it for you?
Oh my gosh. I think if you asked, 10 different self-help people, you're going to get 10 different answers on any given day, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So today,
I just thought you might be able to give me just like a very neat couple of words.
wrap it up with a bow. The first thing that came to me when you said that, I think so much of it is grounded in gratitude. And being thankful for what you have. That's actually one of the first exercises I did. So when that happened to me, when I had really was my rock bottom moment, that was right when the movie The Secret had come out. And I know it was a book before that. So it was all the rage in personal development. And I watched it, and those lessons are heavily laden in gratitude. And that was my challenge, was to name 10 things I was grateful for. And I remember thinking, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like, you know what my life looks like right now. You know what my circumstances are. And I did it. I wrote down 10 things I was grateful for. And it surprised me that given where I was at, given that I hated where I was, I had so much shame around where my life was at that time, I was able to come up with 10 things I was grateful for. So that really sparked something inside of me that gave me hope for that I could create my own happiness.
Oh, it's amazing. And, you talk a lot about these habits throughout the book, and you do provide some incredible tips and takeaways that everybody can use. And I'm so excited to talk about those. But what I would like to talk about first is one of the very first habits that you talk about in the book. We all have a voice inside our heads that tell us ugly things at times, that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, not good looking enough, not popular enough, not enough. And in coaching, we call this voice the gremlin or the inner bully or the inner critic. And this is not something that just adults have. This critical voice starts early, it can be loud, and it can get in the way of our goals, our activities, our life, even as children. So my question for you is, when would be a good time for us to talk to our kids about the inner critic, and how is it that we can bring it up?
That's such a good question. And I love, because my audience, like, I don't work specifically with children or parents. So I love to when I get to talk about this.
This is one of my favorite things too, is challenging those who work for the adult audience to then channel it down, because you know that when we start early, we're all better off. So we're going to translate it down to our children. And of course, we can take this and understand that we can use it ourselves as well.
Yes. And I love this question because I'm going to say one of the same things that I say to everyone, and that it's that the inner critic is universal. Mm-hmm. We all have it. It can sound different. And I also want to say one thing too, is that it doesn't always look like an articulation, or doesn't sound like, I should say, an articulation of thoughts or an inner dialogue. Mm-hmm. For some people, it is an overall just feeling, like a wash overall, that they feel not enough. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because again, it manifests differently for people. Sure. And what I also want to make really clear is that I don't believe that we can completely get rid of this voice or feeling. I think that even people who write books specifically on this, people who study negative self-talk and shame, people like Dr. Brene Brown and Oprah, they still hear it. Mm-hmm. The difference is that they've learned to recognize it so quickly for what it is, and they are able to either turn it around or simply move past it. I found that to be true in my experience as well. Don't you think? Do you agree with me on that?
Yes, I absolutely do.
Okay.
And I just like the idea that we need to even acknowledge that. It's not about obliterating the voice. It's about now understanding that it's there and then how we cope with it.
Yes. And hopefully the space in between when you realize it, and, because for me, I used to let it run away, and I used to base my feelings and decisions on that voice. And that's what I don't want for people. I want the win to be that they hear it very quickly and they can do something about that in a short amount of time. And so what to go back and answer your question is that, as far as putting an age on it, I'm not really sure. So I'm trying to think. So my son is 10. He is now in 4th grade. And my daughter, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she is in 2nd grade. Mm-hmm. And they're both at the point where, yes, I know that they have it. And I'm trying to think when it really first started for my son. And I think it was for him around 2nd grade. And I picked him up from school, and he got in the car, and I could tell, he was bummed out about something. And something had happened in class, whether he raised his hand and gave an answer and it was the wrong answer, or something happened. I mean, how this goes in elementary school and beyond, but it's like that moment of feeling like you're wrong, or that people are laughing at you, or, that you're not like the others, that feeling, we all know that feeling.
Yes.
And so it was really interesting because in that moment, I had not prepared for this moment. Here I am, someone teaches this, it's my child. And all I want to do.
I know. Believe me, I feel like I'm in that situation all the time. I do this all the time. And yet I'm like, what?
When it comes to your own children, it's like, maybe we should homeschool you.
Yeah. That's exactly. Mama bear is coming out.
For you.
Yes.
But I didn't. And the first thing that I did is I said, oh man, you know what? I know what that feels like. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me like, really? and then I thought, oh my gosh, maybe part of the key to this is empathy. And my son also struggles with anxiety, not as much as he used to, but in those kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, we really, really struggled with it. And I do as well, and have learned how to manage my own symptoms. So that was another thing too, where I would go in and just tell him just basically just so much empathy and say, oh, honey, I know how this feels, and it is absolutely just the worst, isn't it? I get it. Do you need a hug? And I would just sit with him while he was in it. And then I would start to talk to him about it and ask him questions and say, well, what is it that you think, what was happening before you had that thought? And then just ask him things like, do you think that thought is really true? And teaching him to separate the facts So for instance, that example that I gave about him raising his hand and getting the wrong answer. So the fact was that he didn't have the right answer, and that is going to happen. And allowing him to understand about the stories that he was making up about himself in regards to the fact that he had the wrong answer. So I found that to be helpful. And I kind of just did that on the fly.
So smart.
In a panic. That was one of the things that I did. And really also another thing that's sort of indirectly related that I teach my children is that I just had to, over the weekend, talk to my son about this because he slammed his door. And he was mad because I would not let him have any more screen time. So I always tell them, I always tell them, you are allowed to feel whatever you feel. Your feelings are never wrong. And the reason that I tell them that is because I think maybe all of us understand what it feels like as a child and as an adult to be made wrong for how we're feeling. For how we're feeling. Like, don't be mad about that. You don't get any more screen time. You shouldn't be mad about that.
Right.
And so I tell them, you're allowed to feel whatever you feel. You're allowed to be mad at me, but you are responsible for your behavior. In other words, no slamming doors, no being nasty to me, no being disrespectful. But again, you're allowed to be mad at me. You're allowed to feel what you feel. And if you do any of those behaviors, we need you to clean it up. We need you to clean up your mess, just like you would clean up your mess if you spilled goldfish crackers all over the floor. So those are the main messages. And I'm kind of at the point where now at this age, that's all I need, because even that's kind of a lot.
Right. No, I think those are really genius. Those are incredibly important. We just recently launched a podcast with Dawn Hebner, who does a great deal on fear and anxiety. And it was just an incredible podcast with lots of tips and scripts. And one of the things she also underscores is that ability to separate fact from fiction. You know, what is really true? And then what is more your brain sort of, you know, taking hold of you and saying this is actually what's happening, when it may very well not. Like your worry becomes sort of a worry wart. Oh, but this might happen, but this is what they were thinking. And so it's really important to be able to, you know, talk about what actually is true. And the other thing that came to mind when you were talking is Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and she talks a lot about all kinds of incredible things. But one of the things that really I loved when she was talking about fear having a space in your car, but not allowing to touch the radio or, you know, telling you where to go, you know. And I talk about that with my kids too. My daughter especially has more of that sort of fear, anxiety, where, you know, she starts to it kind of runs away with her. And I'm like, who's driving your bus? And we've talked extensively about who's driving her bus. And just having that ability to kind of separate yourself out from the things that are actually happening, the worries that you have, the fears that you're having, and that will kind of take hold of you and tell you, well, this is really what's going on. And you can then talk back to it and challenge it and say, no, this is not what's really going on. This is my inner critic telling me, you know, either lies or, you know, making me think something that's not actually true.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I remember that day my son said, when he was telling me the story, he said, I got the answer wrong. And I can't remember if like somebody that was next to him laughed or he thought that somebody laughed or something like that. And he said, and it made me feel so stupid. So when your kids are telling you the story like that, that's an indicator, you know, that type of language. The story he was making up was that he was stupid. Right. And so that's what I helped him break down, like you were saying, what is fact and what is fiction.
I love it. I think that's a great way of going about it. And it's a tool that they can use forever, even as they become adults and parents like us. So, and in that same vein, what about us as parents? We certainly have our own tango with our inner critic. So do you find that it's just as important for us to do our own work around this? And does our inner critic kind of look similar to what's plaguing our kids? What have you found?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, wouldn't it have been great if we were all raised with these great lessons of personal development? And for us, most of the time, my mom laughs because she's like, honey, self-help was not really a thing.
You're like, that was a good idea. This inner critic thing is like really good, but I did not know about it.
I did not know about this. So yeah, most of us are just learning about this in our 30s, 40s, and beyond. And you can use the same lessons that I gave you a few minutes ago. And what I like to do, and this is what I teach my clients, and it was not an accident that this was the very first chapter of my book.
I'm excited to hear these. I really am. Universal. Not that I ever have a problem with them.
Not at all. But I think it's helpful to break down the areas of your life first, because if you're just starting with inner critic work, it can be overwhelming to look at your entire life. So break down the areas of your life. It might be your work and your career, or if you own your own business, your partnership, if you're in one, or your dating life, parenting. And for women, our number one inner critic / shame trigger tends to be our body and appearance, which I know you are also the expert on, Dr. Robyn. So that can be its own area of inner critic. And for many people too, it's great to break down, to have an entire sort of column, if you will, of your past and your future goals and aspirations. So those are just some examples of different areas. And my question is, what does your inner critic say about each of those areas? And maybe just start with one area, because this can be an emotional exercise. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's fun and comfortable and, throw confetti.
Yeah, no.
This is tricky.
It's a little painful.
Yeah.
Digging those things up and ripping off Band-Aids.
Ripping off the Band-Aid, but you can't change what you don't know isn't working. That's what I always say. You cannot change what you don't know isn't working. And for many people, this voice is playing in the background. It's background music that you have just gotten so used to hearing that you barely even notice that it's there.
Right.
We get comfortable being uncomfortable in that sense. And I would start there. And then when the next question I get, because I want people to do when they do this exercise is to be able to recognize it quickly when it's happening. Like, that this one area, like your job is really hard for you. Comparison is a huge thing for the inner critic to latch onto. And the question I get pretty often is, how do I know when it's speaking to me? What's a trick that I can use so I can catch it faster? And my answer to that is, what are your biggest triggers? And for many, we'll take the body and appearance one. When you step out of the shower or the bathtub and you are naked and you're looking in the mirror, what do you say to yourself? Are your thoughts kind and compassionate? Do you not say anything at all? Is it neutral? Or are you picking yourself apart? That's a way to find out. Or is there someone at your work that you are constantly comparing yourself to? Started around the same time and that person has a master's degree and you don't, and you are worried that he's going to get a promotion before you. So is that a trigger of yours? What does your inner critic have to say about that? So sometimes it takes a little bit of kind of concentration and focus on one particular area to be able to kind of dig it out.
And then what is the next step from that once you have decided that each time you get out of the shower and you look in the mirror, you say something negative to yourself, or every time you're at work and you cross paths with that person that you have those thoughts? What's your next thing beyond acknowledging that that's happening?
Well, and this might surprise you, because I think there are many self-help experts that'll tell you to turn it into a positive thought and say positive affirmations to yourself. I actually don't encourage that, because what I have found to be true in my own work and the work of many of my clients is that our kind of BS meters go off.
No kidding, right?
And we're like, really, that's not true. This positive thought. No, I actually don't look like a Miss America contestant right now, looking in the mirror. And so what I ask people to do is just, like you said, acknowledge it and have a mantra. So a mantra is a short, powerful statement. And the mantras that I encourage people to have no charge to them. So in other words, they're not necessarily positive and they're not necessarily negative. The one I use is, I say to myself, well, that just happened. And what I'm doing is I am, let's use that metaphor. I love the metaphor of your inner critic being the driver of your bus.
Yes.
And so, it's as if you're in the passenger seat because your inner critic is driving at that moment.
Yes.
And you turn to your inner critic and you're like, oh, okay, you're clearly the driver right now.
Right.
What am I going to do about that?
Yeah.
And it just, again, because at the end of the day, Robyn, our inner critics are trying to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
They do not want us to rock the boat. They do not want us to change anything. And that's why our inner critics get really chatty when we're thinking about going for a promotion or asking for a raise or, asking someone out on a date, things like that. So I'm not a fan of having a fierce throwdown with your inner critic. It's to me, it's bullying the bully, and I don't think that's very helpful. So it's just acknowledging it. And then some people say, well, then it starts talking again 5 minutes later. And then I'm like, well, then you need to acknowledge it again.
Right.
And I often liken it to learning a new language. And between high school and college, I probably took about 6 years of Spanish, and I have not practiced it. I have not been, seeking out Spanish-speaking people over the last decade or more, and all I know how to say is "Me gusta los tocadiscos." I like record players, which does me no good, right? So
really, really doesn't do you much good right now,
especially not in 2018.
No,
but it's because I have not practiced it. I used it for a little bit, and then that's it. So it's the same with this. It's the same about acknowledging your inner critic and practicing a new language. If you're ready to move on to self-compassion, then by all means, I practice self-compassion around some areas of my life, and other areas I don't. So I can talk about that more if you want, but it just, my point is you have to keep at it.
Yes, you do. And I the reason why I had changed the metaphor to, who's driving your bus is obviously kids don't drive. So, they're putting them in a car. But I also love the idea that there can be multiples. Your inner critic can sort of clone itself, and can feel very loud when you're going along in life, and it kind of keeps popping up and reappearing. So when we can acknowledge it, it's there, and see it as something separate, then we're able to know that it's not our actual voice that's speaking to us. It's something else, and when we identify it, we can move forward a little bit better. I like the idea of just acknowledging it each time, but that idea of it being neutral, that you don't feel like you have to get into a fight with it. That it's just, oh, there you are again.
Yeah. And also you don't have to go down a path of, sometimes we don't have time to get out our journal and journal on it. Sure. And, how do you want to speak to yourself? Because it would be great if we had the time and space every time that happened to turn it around and speak compassionately to ourselves. The truth of the matter is that we all lead very busy lives, and we just don't have time.
Don't.
And so for me personally is that I pick when I do have the time and space, and especially the areas. So for me, and I'm sure for most of your listeners, one of the areas that I tend to be hard on myself is parenting. And I'll never forget, there was one time where, so my son is on the autism spectrum, and this was in, I believe it was first or second grade, when we were having a really hard time at school. And I had just left an IEP meeting. And, for anyone who's ever been in one, or even if your child isn't on the spectrum, if you've had a hard meeting at school with administrators and teachers, sometimes we walk away from those meetings feeling like a failure as a parent.
Yes,
and that was the voice that was going on in my head. And I was also telling myself things like, I should be advocating for him more. I haven't even done one of those autism 5Ks, and just coming up with all of these things that I was doing wrong as a parent. Absolutely. And thus, we go to worst case scenario, right? And I remember I was at a red light, and I stopped myself, and I was like, okay, wow, I just went off the rails there for a minute. And I just told myself, I am actually doing the best I can.
Right.
I am doing the best that I can. And it's not coming up with excuses or anything like that, but it is. I love my son more than anything, just like all of you listening. And we are doing the best that we can. And so that to me is self-compassion. And that area of my life is the one that I really try to work on, being compassionate with myself versus beating myself up.
Such an important tool in life, and sometimes hard to do, but I appreciate that as a tool to put into our arsenal, but also to teach our kids. Now, you mentioned 14 habits in your book, and that we need to tune into these so that we can stop feeling terrible and start becoming sort of happy and fulfilled people that we're destined to become, hopefully. So coping with your inner critic is one of them, but what are some of the other key habits that we're hoping to stop doing?
I think, I always think about the person's audience when I'm answering that question, because it might vary depending on whom I'm talking to. And I think, honestly, another one that is universal is numbing out. And we don't want to feel like, come over into the deep end of the pool with me for a minute, Robyn, and all the listeners. But that whole chapter is about feeling your feelings because, and I know this, I half joke that for a long time I was the mayor of Numb Your Feelings Town. And for me, it looked, all of my 20s, it looked like pretty severe codependence and love addiction.
Sure.
Which I didn't realize until I was about 30. And then I read a book on it and I was like, oh my God, this woman wrote the story of my life. And, I healed from that. And then I was in and out of an eating disorder in my 20s. And then when my kids were really little, as I was healing with those things, my drinking picked up. And it was not long after that I decided I needed to get sober because I was starting to drink alcoholically. And even way before that, I was thinking alcoholically since probably my late teens. So I definitely know what it's like to be emotionally illiterate. And that's what I call how I was for a long time. I did not know how to truly feel my feelings. I also had very little emotional boundaries. And so I think that when we are like that, which is a lot of people, we numb out. It is too difficult to feel. And that might not necessarily be with probably the most famous alcohol and food. For me, it was also clothes. Spending, but typically most often clothes and busyness. Now that's one I have to watch out for.
I think we all do, don't we?
Right?
Yes. Emotional illiteracy. I think that's genius. I love that idea, not only for other people, not being able to read other people, but our own selves. I think that's so interesting. And the idea that we're numbing ourselves, so that we're not feeling, also makes it so we're hiding our feelings even from our own selves and kind of kidding ourselves. So I think that's a very important one. And understanding that can also translate from a parent to a child, a child who throws themselves into constant activities or is constantly busy or with friends, or they may not be, sitting with themselves and feeling what they're supposed to be feeling so that, they can kind of move forward in their lives. So that's an interesting one. One of the habits that you mentioned in the book that is detrimental to our own habits is the desire to please others. And I think that hits the nail on the head for a lot of people, what you refer to this dog and pony show. And as our young girls are often taught at a very young age, you having a daughter, I have a daughter, many of us have, girls in our lives that are in elementary school or middle school or high school. Many of them, feel the need to be liked, that they need to please others, even if that means not pleasing themselves. So I would like to put some high beams on this for a moment. So if there was a girl in front of you, maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's not, maybe it's, a coaching client's daughter, maybe it's my daughter, and you found that she was repeatedly pleasing others and sort of pushing out her own needs or wants aside, what would you say to her?
I would want to have a conversation with her, I think, versus say anything to her. And I would get really curious and help her get curious because she probably doesn't even realize she's doing it. And I think that was probably the case for many of us growing up. And I don't mean to stereotype, but I'm going to. But we as women, we are, and this is a cultural thing, we are brought up to put our needs before others and to be the nurturers, to be the one who takes care of everything at a high cost. And, that cost being ourselves. And sometimes that cost being our values and what we really want to do. So I would just get really curious and ask her, did you really want to say yes to that? And if she says yes, like, why do you tell me what's in it for you? Tell me what you're getting out of saying yes to that project or that person. And really just helping her kind of untangle it and unpack it. Because again, I think that we get so used to it, we don't even realize that we don't want to do it.
Absolutely. I literally just had this conversation with somebody this morning at the gym. Just this conversation. She said to me, she sort of got roped into doing something at her child's school that she really didn't want to do. Somebody else dropped the ball, and somebody came to her and asked her to fill in. And, she's like, I do this constantly. I did not want to do it, but of course I did it. And then her kid is not even going to be at the school next year. And so I had joked playfully with her that they're going to call her again next year. And she goes, and I'll say yes, because I am a sucker for any of it, even if I don't have the time and, I wasn't even supposed to be there in the first place. So I'm guessing that you're going to say that if we are doing that as parents, that it will translate quite easily to our children, even if we don't say anything. So what do we do about that?
Oh my gosh. So I want to ask that lady, and I think an adult could answer this. What are you afraid might happen if you say no?
Oh, such a good question.
What is she? We can answer.
Right. Like somebody won't like us. They think we're, all high and mighty.
Yeah, exactly. That
you think you have a life that
we're afraid of people not liking us. We're afraid of having a bad reputation. Yes. I was just writing about this morning. So this is kind of another angle how this works, is that I had to write an email telling somebody was dropping the ball on something. And I had to have a conversation with this person saying like, hey, you're doing this and it's not working. We need a better solution. And I started the email by saying, I don't mean to be a diva about this.
Oh, Lord.
And I'm reading what I just wrote and I was like, oh my God, here I go.
Yeah.
And it's not that I was apologizing but I was people pleasing, and it's like a roundabout way of saying it. And the truth of it is, if I ask myself that same question, what am I afraid of if I don't say it, if I don't preface the email with, I don't mean to be a pain in the butt about this. What I'm actually saying is, please don't be angry with me. Please don't think I'm hard to work with. Please don't think I'm too demanding. And this is something we face as females. And oh my gosh, don't get me started, Robyn.
Look, I know we could do like an entire podcast on pleasing. I just presented not long ago in Florida, and we were talking about creating buy-in in these businesses that work with children, and I said, why is it that we often do not give feedback to our employees who are working, with kids? Or why don't we give the feedback that they need? Not just, obviously not just the positive, but also the negative. What stops us? And I'm going through all the barriers, and then on my slide, I, circle pleasing, and then I have like 5 arrows pointing to it, because I know that it stops us in our tracks in our personal life and in our professional life. We're so afraid that people aren't going to like us that we go down the wrong path. We don't say what we need to say. We say things we don't even mean. And then it can backfire, but we'll deal with that too, just to make sure that everybody else is happy.
Well, we're used to it. And this goes pretty deep, Robyn. I work with women on the topic of shame. I'm certified to do it. Like I've been trained, because this is such a big topic. Like nobody really loves talking about shame, right?
Right.
But what this actually is, if you break this down, I geek out on this. So
I'm liking it already. I'm so excited.
I'm pulling my sleeves up. I just pulled my sleeves up and put my hair in a ponytail because I love this work.
I've gotten closer to the microphone so I can hear you better.
Okay, because we all have these ways of being that we do not want to be perceived by other people. These are our triggers. For women, typically, we don't want to be perceived as demanding or hard to work with, aggressive, etc. And so when we say no, or when we give feedback that's less than stellar, or any of those things that make us feel like we're being hard to work with, then that can elicit shame in us. And that's what we are running away from. And the thing is like you were saying, you know, we do this for decades until what I say in the intro of my book is I say these habits work until they don't. That's me paying homage to a saying from the Rooms of Recovery. That saying is it works until it doesn't. And people pleasing works until it doesn't. And many the women, especially that come to work with me privately, get to a point where they are done.
Yes, and you're like, all right, honey, let's go.
And it's not about, I think there's a misconception that saying no or setting a boundary is mean or too assertive or, you know, I won't use the B word, but we all know what that word is.
Right.
And you can still set a boundary and you can still give feedback that isn't positive with kindness and grace and honesty.
Yes.
And even gratitude. And it's really on them how they receive it. Right. You are responsible for your intention, not your reception. And these are some hard lessons to learn, though. These are big.
This is great. Before we get to the top tip, I'm going to ask you one more question about your habits, just because I find this so intriguing. And, you know, I think that everybody listening is also, you know, going, yeah, that's me. So another area that you discuss, I think, is not only common with adults, but also very much with teens, the sort of go away and leave me alone habit. And it's not just about that. In that case, it's not numbing. It's literally like shutting people out and basically coping with your heavy load by yourself. So why do you find this to be detrimental, and how can key adults in our kids' lives, so ourselves, our coaches, our teachers, how can they help our kids to choose mentorship, assistance, a compassionate ear, instead of hiding and trying to cope with the heavy load themselves?
I think the reason we are here is because we sort of wear that as a badge of honor. You know, we see the memes on Pinterest and all around the internet of like, don't care what anybody thinks of you. And I call it the 0 F's mentality. And I get on board. I get the sentiment, you know, it's go after what you want. Don't be bogged down. Don't be a people pleaser. Don't be bogged down by other people's opinions and criticism, et cetera, or the fear of failure. But I think what it points to is black or white thinking, and that we either, you know, are a people pleaser or we don't care what anybody thinks of us. We can do it all on our own. You know, the whole like, I don't need no man, I'm an independent woman. And the thing is, we do need people. We need people very much. And it's about the right people. So I think as far as teenagers is just keep reiterating that you are there to listen. Because and again, I'm not the expert on teenagers, but what I hear over and over again that teens say, and I remember feeling this way as a teen, is no one's listening to me.
Absolutely.
And
I mean, the studies even say that they perceive that they do not have at least 3 people they can turn to in a time of need or challenge when it comes to adults, and that the adults they talk to won't necessarily believe them or be helpful. That's the research.
And my guess is that what they are facing when they do reach out is they're met with a lot of advice that they never asked for.
Absolutely.
And you get it right? I'm like totally guessing.
No, absolutely. I mean, they were like, I was just looking to, you know, unload, but also the advice sometimes stinks.
Yeah. And I think that teenagers are smart enough. Like, if they want advice, they will ask for it. They are not 2 and 3 years old. They have the capacity to ask for it when they need it.
It's like, this is my opinion, though, and I want you to have it. That's, you know.
Because I know better. And we might know better.
Yes. Right? We've been through it.
I can imagine as a parent, again, mine are only 10 and 8, but that has got to be excruciating to have your child come to you and say, this is going on, and you have so much good advice and wisdom for them, and to not give it.
No,
so that's why I think, and I like you said, a mentor or someone else who doesn't have the tight emotional attachment than you do as their parent.
So important. Like, thank goodness for our, you know, the kids' coaches and our kids' teachers, you know, and we have many of them in our listening audience, because it's a multitude of key adults. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that we are not always, as parents, the correct key adult to advise our kids. That sometimes the best thing we can say is, you know, whose help could you use right now? How can I help bridge the gap between you and X person so that you get the advice that you need? Because you're just not always the best person because you have so much emotional stake, as you said.
Yeah. And I think that the reason that I guessed right is because this is the same for adult relationships as teens, because most of the time, and this was hard in my marriage. So my husband is a fixer. He has an engineer's brain. If I come to him with a problem, he immediately is strategizing when I'm only 2 sentences in about how we're going to fix it.
Yes.
And I would get so frustrated. And I know this is a common complaint in partnerships, but now I preface conversations. And if I don't need any advice, which is honestly, Robyn, like 95% of the time, then I preface it and I say, something happened today and I'm super, insert feeling here about it. And I don't need any help. I don't need any advice. I just need like 10 minutes of your time. So he knows that is like, put your phone down, eye contact, listen. And, we've been through some hard stuff together. My father passed away not that long ago. And and I might've had a really hard grief day. And I just needed to tell him how my day went and how hard it was. My husband can't take away that grief for me. There's nothing he can say that can help me. But what actually does help is telling another human being that I trust and that we have this already created emotional relationship together. That's it. That's all I want. And that's connection. That's the human love and connection and trust and intimacy.
Well, and that's what we're looking for. And what a beautiful way of honoring your feelings and yourself and making sure that the tip there is not only to be able to, go to somebody and have a friend or a mentor or a teacher or a sounding board, whoever it is, but that you can actually be proactive in telling them what you need. I don't need your advice right now. I just need a listening ear. Or as a parent or a coach, to ask somebody, do you need my advice right now? Or do you just want me to listen? Because that can be extremely powerful as well.
Asking the question, how can I support you right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of my colleagues says, how can I be awesome for you right now?
Oh, like that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, so important. What great work that you are doing. And I like that you're isolating these habits so that we can kind of pay attention to each one of them and see how they're plaguing our lives and or having a role in our lives, perhaps in a negative way. So before we wind up everything, can you just give us your top tip? What is your top tip so that we can stop feeling really bad and start feeling really good, as good as it can be? We can start embracing happiness, and hopefully we can teach our kids how to do the same.
Well, I have so many, and I never want people to walk away from these podcasts feeling too overwhelmed. So I'm going to circle back to what we talked about and really underscore it and give away a tangible thing for people to do. And that's listening to your inner critic. And when you find yourself, because I know what's going to happen to everybody this week, you're going to go on with your week and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, there it is. Especially, I think if you're on social media and find yourself comparing. And my tip is to ask yourself what stories you're making up about yourself based on what you're seeing online, based on that comparison, based on whatever your inner critic is saying, based on what you're feeling. What stories are you making up about yourself? And just get curious about it.
Oh, so interesting. Right. That you're in some way subpar, right? That's what's going on in our heads so often. And being able to isolate the exact feeling or the stories that we're saying to ourselves, then we can say, wait a second, is that really true? Am I actually talking the truth right to myself? It's so important.
Sometimes it's a runaway train of a story. Yeah. I know it is for me.
Yes.
And like that example I was giving, thinking about me not being a good enough advocate for my son. And I was thinking all the way out into high school and what's this life going to be?
No.
That's how far I went.
Oh my
gosh.
Just at a red light. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. One of my best friends, she's like, your son, your daughter, they're not going to have a bad life because of what just happened. Like, that's just not going to happen. But it does wind up, gaining so much traction, and the wheel gets so much bigger, building up all this body and just goes running away with itself. You're absolutely right. And it is important to stop that in its tracks. And I know that when you're in the story that you were talking about, that you were in the car and you were like, wait a second, I need to stop right here. What an important thing to kind of take hold of the runaway train and saying, okay, let me unpack this for a moment and see what's really happening. That's great. Mm-hmm. So give us the resource of the week. Where can we go to find out more about you or your book or any of the other things that you're doing right now?
Best way to find me is at yourkickasslife.com. And I like to hang out on Instagram and engage with people over there. So I'm at that same handle, yourkickasslife, over on Instagram.
Oh, so perfect. Because I recently got on Instagram.
No, I just followed you.
I'm so excited. I mean, it's so recent, but I am having such a good time. People are so responsive and they say the nicest things. Like, I was like, I knew nothing about this until, a few weeks back, and we're like, oh, wait a second. What have I been missing? There's nice people on Instagram. I like it. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. When I thought about who can I interview that I think is just going to just, spread some warm cheer, but give us some really concrete tools, I thought of you and this new book, because it really does give us some concrete things to think about, the habits, but also some key tools and takeaways to help us in our own lives. And I always love layers where what we're learning can apply to us, but it also can apply to the next level, whether it's employees or to our children, and then go down the line. You sort of pass on the tool the more that we model it, but also discuss it. So thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been super fun.
Oh, good. I had fun too. Well, I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I know you have yours. Let's discuss them. Come up on Facebook. We can go to the Dr. Robyn Silverman page. We can chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com. We just talked about Instagram, so you can get me on Dr. Robyn Silverman, or twitter.com/Dr. Robyn. And if you love this podcast like I did, and I hope you got some really good tools and takeaways you can use right away and discuss with your kids, I hope you'll go up to iTunes and rate and review it so other people can hear about these great tools that Andrea has talked about and get her book. All right, that's all the time we have for today. My fellow parents, leaders, and educators, thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. There's some great podcasts up there, awesome show notes from this show so that you can look at the quotes. I mean, this was like a quotable one. We got all kinds of great quotes up there, great ideas, and there's links to the book and to the website for Andrea Owen. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even on the days when you fall short, we all have them. We have all been there. I know it's not easy, but never forget there's always tomorrow. Parenting is the ultimate do-over. I see you. I'm right there with you. And as there are moments when we doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet, sweet sanity, please know you're 10 times the parent you think you are. You really are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please tune in again and keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.